who has victory in life-controlling anger, low self-worth, and most recently, binge eating. Hi. I'm going to share a bit of what God has done in my life. I grew up in a fairly normal home. I had two parents who loved me, my brother, and each other. My mom took us to church starting when I was in 4th grade. I was baptized when I was 12, and I believed that there was a God and that Jesus died on the cross for my sins, but that was the extent of my relationship with him. My grandmother on my dad's side passed away when I was in 2nd grade. She was actually the only grandparent I ever knew, but my relationship with her was very strained. Since she passed when I was so young, I don't have a lot of memories of her, and the ones I do are not really great. I remember her making comments about my weight, specifically one Christmas when I was 4. One of my aunts asked her why she bought all the other grandkids jeans and me jogging pants, and she responded, "She's too fat to wear jeans." I also remember how she would spend time with each of the other grandkids one-on-one, but never me. This is where I learned to pretend to be okay when I really felt left out and unloved, just to appease someone else's feelings. My dad adored his mom. He was the baby of the family, and I adored my dad. So I never wanted to hurt him by telling him how his mom made me feel so unwanted and unworthy of her love and acceptance. I remember as a child hearing comments about my weight from various family members, including my own father. Starting at the age of 4, I felt shame over the way I looked. Food soon became both my source of pain and comfort. When I was upset or sad or sick, I was offered food to comfort me. And most of the time, it made me feel better. So I learned to use that as a coping mechanism. Comments made at our dinner table about my portion sizes and, "Wow, I can't believe she ate that much," drove me to start sneaking to eat. By elementary school, I was literally a closet eater. When my parents weren't looking, I would stuff snacks in my pockets, go to my room, hide in my closet, and eat as many as I could as fast as I could. I wasn't the most active kid. I loved to be inside and read and nerdy stuff. But when I was 7, my dad asked me to start playing baseball, and I wanted to make him happy, so I did. And when I was 10, I switched over to softball. And honestly, I was pretty good at it. I had fun, and I started making friends. And it was a time when I actually never really worried about my size because I was a home run hitter, so it was my advantage. My brother also played baseball, and my dad was his coach every year. But when I was 12, my dad switched and took a year to coach my softball team. I was so proud to have my dad as the coach. My team had been playing together for a few years, same players, and we had won the championship the year before. On the first day of practice, my dad told us to run laps. We all told him, "We don't run." We were 12-year-old girls. So yeah, we were being sassy. But in front of my whole team, my dad looked at me and said, "Fine, just go sit in the truck and eat a Twinkie." I walked to the truck at 12 years old, feeling like my dad had just punched me in the gut in front of all of my friends. I wanted nothing more than to make my dad proud, but that season I felt like a complete letdown to him, and it was the last season I ever played. At age 13, my weight started to pack on even more, so I was signed up for Weight Watchers and forced onto a diet. I did lose a little bit of weight, and I started seeking attention from boys. I would flirt and kiss and cross sexual lines with boys just to feel loved and like my body wasn't completely disgusting. I would be fine when things were going well with a boy, but then as soon as things went south, I would binge eat again. My weight yo-yoed based on if I had a boyfriend or not. My self-worth was tied directly to how other people saw me. This continued well into my 20s. Multiple sexual partners, using food to cope with my emotions, and then having shame over my binging and using food to cope with my shame. It was a vicious cycle of tormenting myself and my body. In high school, I let boys use me for sex. At this point in my life, the bullying at school was relentless, on top of all the comments I was getting at home. My dad often made comments like, if you don't get your weight under control, nobody's ever gonna love you. I felt like I had nothing to offer anyone. It didn't matter that I was kind, and I was smart, and I was funny. All anyone seemed to see was that I was overweight. I just kept eating my feelings. In school, I would buy 2 lunches and find a classroom to eat them in or eat them in the bathroom so no one would see how much I was eating. But it's honestly the only way I knew how to get through my day. All throughout high school, even though I was acting out, and I still attended church. I attended church until I was 18, and I moved to college and decided church wasn't for me. I can believe in God and not have to go to church. I went to Ball State my freshman year of college, and I failed out. I graduated high school with an honors diploma, so I didn't quite understand why I would fail out of Ball State. However, years later, I now know it is because I fell into what I didn't know at the time was actually a depression. And the only thing I could actually manage to do was sleep and work, and that's just because I worked at Dairy Queen. I came home, took a semester off, got a job running a dry cleaning store, and enrolled in Ivy Tech. I dated here and there, but nothing lasted for more than a couple months because I was explosive. I had so much anger inside of me. If people didn't do exactly what I wanted them to do when I wanted them to do it, I assumed they hated me because of my weight, so I would verbally assault them because this became my defense mechanism to keep myself from being the one that gets hurt. In my mid-20s, I met my ex-husband, who had two children and had previously been married. We dated for a few months, and I exploded, but he didn't let me walk away. I tried to end things, but he refused. He was the first guy to ever fight to keep me once I exploded. Looking back on it now, I know that it wasn't his kindness that did that, it was his manipulation. But still, I was terrible to him. I called him every name in the book. I threw things, was hateful and mean, but he stayed. And at that point in my life, that was enough, because I didn't even think I deserved that much. We were engaged in September of 2010 and married the following October. In 2012, I started a keto diet. I tried working out, and I started working out at a gym. And I was losing weight, but I was still binging. I was just binging on keto foods. But I managed to lose 65 pounds. And then I found out I was pregnant. My pregnancy was tough physically. And on top of that, my husband became my biggest enabler. I used my pregnancy as an excuse to eat whatever I wanted, however much I wanted, whenever I wanted. My weight exploded during my pregnancy. By the end, I had gained 140 pounds and I was over 420 pounds. On September 20th of 2013, my daughter was born. Shortly before this, 2 weeks before this, my two stepsons had come to move in with us full time. It was overwhelming, working full time and taking care of an infant, and I was on a wound vac, and I had two elementary aged kids at home, and I was doing it all by myself because my husband was working long hours. I started to binge more and more. I would eat enough for 3 to 4 people in one sitting. Food and anger became my sources of comfort. I would binge while my husband was at work. Then when he came home, I would verbally assault him. In July of 2014, we bought a 3-bedroom house in Fortville. Our daughter was about 9 months old. My stepson's mother said that they could come back and live with her, but a couple of months later, my husband received a phone call at 10 p.m. on a Wednesday night saying that he had to come and get their youngest because he was not allowed to stay with her any longer. This was the start of his youngest son living with us full time for 4 years. Even though I was married, I felt like a single parent. I was the only one that handled the kids. All schoolwork, appointments, chores, hygiene, trips to the park, trips to the zoo. It was all on me. Unfortunately, when it came to punishment, I had zero authority. Every punishment I handed out to my stepson was immediately reversed as soon as my husband got involved. So I started losing my temper more and more. If my stepson would refuse to do his homework, I would explode screaming at the top of my lungs or stomping away and slamming doors. Regardless of how I was acting, I did love my stepson, my daughter, and my husband. I was just stuck, and all I could see was the struggle. I am ashamed to say that I spent more time in those years yelling at my kids and husband than I did showing them love and affection. Then in July of 2018, our lives changed forever. My daughter was now 4, and my dad was watching her for me during the day while I worked. When I went to pick her up, I knew something was wrong by the look on my dad's face. And when he opened his mouth, my world shattered. He told me my stepson had molested my daughter the day before. My daughter had told him what happened, and my heart broke. I felt helpless, and I felt like a terrible mom. There was never a doubt in my mind that my daughter's story was real. She's told the same story for 6 years now, and I believe her wholeheartedly. I can't say the same for my husband. I was angry at my stepson, but I was also so angry at my husband and his ex-wife because my stepson had been caught multiple times doing inappropriate things, saying inappropriate things, and looking at inappropriate things. And anytime I mentioned it to them, they would do nothing. Boys will be boys. So as I fought for my daughter without the support of my husband, our lives were turned upside down. I wanted justice and protection for my daughter, but I didn't feel like DCS, the police, or my husband cared about her at all. They were so focused on my stepson and what was going to happen to him. This was the start of my already fragile marriage completely starting to fall apart. No matter the anger I had for my husband before, it was nothing compared to the hatred and anger and resentment I now had for him. I could not even look at him. I blamed him for not protecting our daughter by addressing his son's issues before it happened, and I hated him for not taking our daughter's side. Months went by, and our house went from a battleground to us just living like roommates. We went days and didn't even speak to each other. About 6 months after my daughter was molested, I started suspecting something was wrong with my husband. November 29th, my cousin, who was a friend of my husband's, confirmed that my husband was actually having an affair and was bragging about it to my cousin and even showing him pictures. Of course, there was a lot of back and forth at this time, a lot of drama. I was so angry and so hurt. And I wasn't dealing with any of it other than trying to destroy my husband and mistress and eating. I lashed out, acting tough, but inside I was so incredibly hurt, and I felt so much shame over my life. What I can recognize now that I couldn't back then was how much binging I did during this season of my life. My self-worth at this point was at its lowest, my anger at its highest, and I was eating more and more food each and every day. Christmas 2018, my ex wanted to take our daughter to his parents' house where she would have to come face to face with her abuser, who she had not seen in over 6 months. After speaking to an attorney, she said I couldn't keep our daughter, so I decided to keep our daughter from him. So I decided to let my grudge go long enough for him to come over and spend Christmas morning with our daughter at my new apartment. That started us reconciling. One of his coworkers suggested the Wellspring Center at Brandywine Community Church for marriage counseling. It's a biblically ran peer counseling program, and there were a couple of homework assignments that changed my life. The first was to attend church on a Sunday morning. I had not attended church except for once a year on Mother's Day for 15 years. But we did it as a homework assignment. And as I sat there, I felt home. Soon, I was a weekly attender in a life group and a new member. Our other homework assignment, was to attend a Celebrate Recovery meeting. The night we ended up going was actually graduation night. You guys haven't had a graduation, have you? Okay, they're amazing. I'm excited for you guys to get to that. Anyway, graduation is when the people that walk through a step study come together with their other CR family and they celebrate the healing that these people have gotten over their journey. It was a men's group graduation, and I don't remember the guys that were on that stage, but I remember seeing 12 miracles, and I wanted it. I saw freedom, and I wanted it. So I started attending Celebrate Recovery every week, even though my husband refused. In every area of my recovery, the hardest step for me to ever take is step one. For me, I like to justify things. So my anger was justified because I'm the victim and they deserve it. For my low self-worth, I was just like, I don't not like myself. Look how happy I am on the outside, and I ignored everything on the inside. And for my binge eating, I always just told myself, I just need to find the right diet for me. It wasn't until I took step one in all of these areas of recovery that I realized that I was the one with the compulsive anger behavior issue. No diet was ever going to work for me if I was using food to comfort myself. And I don't get to say who I am because God's already done that. Step one says we admitted we were powerless over our addictions and compulsive behaviors, that our lives had become unmanageable. I started seeing healing in my life. I started really forgiving people, beginning with my husband's affair. I released all anger and bitterness over that affair. And as I started to forgive people and release anger, the resentment that had built up in me, it started to feel like I exploded less. this changed so many of my relationships. I started to realize I'm not a failure as a mom, as a daughter, as a friend, a wife, a granddaughter, because everything I am is what God made me to be to these specific people at this specific time in this part of my life. He will use every experience I have, every hurt I go through, and every mistake I make for His glory. Exodus 50:20 says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good." In 2021, I joined my first step study. I met some really amazing women and made connections that are lifelong friendships. In November of 2022, though, I found out that my husband had been continuing his affair the entire time we were reconciling and had even had a child with this woman in 2021. However, there hasn't been a moment since this revelation that I have felt alone, unseen, or unloved. The difference between my experience in 2018 and 2022 can only be described as God. And although my marriage did not make it, I am so grateful for reconciling and staying those extra 4 years, because it's actually where my foundation in Christ was built. When you live in a battle zone, you can't help but pray every day. Step 7 is where I personally start to see more victory, which says, we humbly ask Him to remove all of our shortcomings. I realized I had to get out of my own way and let God remove my chains. I'd spent my whole life trying to fix myself, but I never felt whole or loved or worthy. When I really got deep into my issues, I realized that my anger and binge eating were symptoms. It wasn't the core issue that I needed to deal with. I was angry because I was trying to control everything. I was walking around with so much unforgiveness in my heart, it was just leaking out everywhere. I wanted to let it all go, but I couldn't do it alone. I was binging on food because it had become my comfort zone. So anytime my life was out of control or I felt any kind of emotion, I turned to food to comfort me. Both unmanageable compulsive behaviors were actually fueled a lot by my low self-worth. So I had to start seeing myself as God sees me. And He says in Colossians 3:12 that I am loved. And in Ephesians 1:7, He says, I am forgiven. And in Ephesians 1:4, He says, I am chosen. And in 2 Corinthians 5:17, He says, I am a new creation. And in Romans 8:1, He says, I am not condemned. In Romans 8:37, He says, I am more than a conqueror. In Ephesians 2:10, He says, I am His masterpiece. In Philippians 1:6, He says, I'm a work in progress. In Philippians 4:19, He says, I am provided for. And in 1 Corinthians 15:57, He says, I am victorious. By the grace of God, I have victory over that life-controlling anger, those low self-worth thoughts, and binge eating to cope with my feelings. I am so grateful for the powerful transformation God's done in my life. And the most valuable thing I have learned coming to Celebrate Recovery is that God has a plan for us here on earth, not just for our eternity. Eternity starts the day we accept Jesus into our heart. If we submit to Him and humble ourselves and allow ourselves to be transformed, He will give us victory over our hurts, habits, and hangups right now. I continued with my step study, and I grew deeper and deeper into my relationship with God, realizing that God wanted more for me than just to say I believe in Him. He wants me to have a full-on relationship. He wants to be my go-to. He wants me to make him a part of my daily life, and he wants to reveal his purpose, and his character, and his plan to me. By seeking God's will and not my own, I have found an indescribable peace. In October of last year, 2023, I completed my second step study. And this is where I found my healing in binge eating and more healing in anger. And I now have a healthier, more sustainable relationship with food than I have ever had in my whole life. I was also able to, through that step study, release the control of the outcome of my divorce over to God. And I let it go. And I didn't carry the anxiety and stress around like I used to do. As I mentioned earlier, I was brought into Brandywine trying to mend a marriage. And God told me to stay there for 4 years because he had some work to do on me. Those 4 years were not always easy, but they gave me a community through Celebrate Recovery and my church and many other ministries that I could have never dreamed of having before. When I left him in 2018, I had 0 friends to call and tell that my husband had an affair. When I found out in 2022, I had an entire phone full of people I could reach out to. That divorce that brought me to Brandywine was finalized 8 days ago. And as I trusted God of the outcome, I actually got everything I'd asked for from the very beginning. God has given me an ability to find peace in the midst of chaos. I know God used the brokenness of my marriage to transform me. He used it to grow me, and he used it to build me up so that I would be ready for this challenge when it was his timing. Now, as far as my second step study and my binge eating, I have tried pretty much every diet out there at this point in my life. But I was always only focused on the food level of my issue. I never really dug deep to find the root as to why food was such an issue for me. It wasn't until Celebrate Recovery that I admitted a lot of that verbal and emotional abuse that was done to me in my childhood and how much it was connected to how I saw food today. Today, I am down 128 pounds. And I hope you believe me when I tell you, I am not on a diet. I am simply no longer using food to cope with my feelings and my emotions. It is by the grace of God that I have been able to defeat the urges to binge when life feels out of control. Through the inventory process, I was able to identify some triggers that caused me to binge. And I was able to modify certain habits so I wasn't being tempted. The better I feel, the easier it is not to binge. I still have urges to turn to food for comfort, but now I take a moment and I meditate with God and I let him pour his peace over me, and I pray for him to take that temptation away. It's not always easy, but with God, it's always possible. My relationships with my family have been more balanced. I've set healthy boundaries, and I am able to control my tongue and not spit out nasty, hateful words when I feel hurt. I'm actually able to have a conversation with a person that hurt me and address the issue in a respectful manner. My relationship with my daughter in particular has truly changed. I'm able to enjoy the simple moments with her now without overreacting for her simply acting like a normal 10-year-old. Recovery is a process, though. And sometimes the change happens over a long period of time, and you may not think that people have noticed. You may not have even noticed it yourself. I didn't for a long time. However, it was my dad who has told me over the last 5 years on more than one occasion how different I am now. And many people from my local CR who have walked the journey with me over the last 5 years have told me the changes they've seen. But man, my daughter takes the cake. She and I were sitting in a clinic waiting to be seen, and there was a man and his son in the room next to us, and the man was yelling at his son. And my little girl looked up at me and said, "Mommy, I'm so glad you're not like that anymore." I will be forever grateful for the ministry of Celebrate Recovery and all of my CR family locally and globally. If you're new here, keep coming back. You won't regret it. It'll be a long process. There'll be ups and downs, and there will be days you want to quit. It's hard work. And you're going to have to face things that you never wanted to face again in your life. But once you work through it and you surrender it to God, you take its power away and you don't have to lean into it anymore. Healing is hard, but staying stuck in your hurt is also hard. You get to choose your hard. Thank you for letting me share.